The first rays of morning light trickled through the lattice of iron and glass that crowned the city's central station. It was one of those crisp autumn days, where the air smelled like turning leaves and change. In the bustle of heels and hurried footsteps, one figure moved with a quiet rhythm, a young woman with a tired face, a threadbare scarf, and a modest canvas lunchbox gripped tightly in her hands. Her name was Neera Dawson, and she walked the same path every morning, from the small apartment she shared with her younger brother to the cafe tucked under the awning of the old Preston Library. Her life was a choreography of sacrifice, up before dawn to prepare meals, work 2 shifts, and study at night in hopes of finally finishing her teaching degree. Today felt no different. She glanced down at the lunchbox and smiled faintly. It was her brother Micah's favorite, packed with the last of their rice and lentils. One more week, she whispered to herself, and maybe the utility bill won't win this time. As she approached the corner near the cafe, a sleek charcoal sedan pulled up and parked haphazardly. The door swung open and out stepped a tall man in a navy wool coat, his gait swift, movements precise. He glanced at his watch, clearly in a rush, and didn't notice the black wallet slip from his coat pocket as he crossed the street. But Neera did. For a moment, she hesitated. The sidewalk was crowded. No one else had seen. But the pause didn't last. She pushed through the flow of commuters and jogged to catch him. "Sir," she called out, raising the wallet. "You dropped this." The man turned, startled. His eyes, a deep steel gray, met hers as she handed the wallet forward. There was a moment of confusion in his gaze, then a flicker of something warmer. "You chased me. Just for this?" he asked, his tone colored with disbelief. Neera smiled softly. "It was yours. I thought you'd want it back." He took the wallet, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Not many would have bothered. "It's no trouble," she said. "Have a good morning." And with that, she turned and disappeared into the cafe without another word. The man stood still for a beat longer. His name was Calder Rowan, founder and CEO of Rowan Enterprises, a name whispered in boardrooms and across stock tickers, though rarely spoken aloud in places like this. Yet there he was, momentarily caught off guard by a stranger who didn't ask for anything. Inside the cafe, Neera tied on her apron and washed her hands. The brief exchange had already begun to blur into the haze of morning routine. Lattes. Croissants. Smiles. Repeat. But in a downtown office tower with a view that scraped the sky, Calder sat in silence. The usual tide of morning reports and emails failed to hold his attention. His fingers drummed idly against his desk. That girl. The way she looked at him. Not with awe or ambition, but with a kind of unfiltered kindness, the sort that couldn't be faked. He hadn't meant to lose the wallet. Nor did he expect anyone to return it. He had money. Status. He was used to the calculated smiles, the rehearsed compliments. But this had been different. That evening, Neera returned home to find Micah waiting on the couch, sketchbook in hand. His illness had kept him out of school for weeks now, but he smiled anyway. "You're late," he teased gently. "Yeah," she said, placing the lunchbox on the side table. "Busy day." I returned a wallet to a stranger. He looked like he belonged in a magazine or something. Micah raised an eyebrow. And nothing. Just strange eyes. Like he didn't expect people to be decent. Miles away, Calder stood by his apartment window, scotch in hand, staring out at the city lights. His world was all marble and silence, a sterile shell around a man who had long since stopped believing in coincidence. Yet that girl's face, Neera, kept appearing behind his eyelids every time he blinked. He set the glass down. Minutes later, his car was navigating back toward the cafe, this time not for coffee, but for a glimpse, a confirmation that she wasn't a figment. But the cafe was closed. Lights off. Only a dim glow poured from a window above it, tucked into a narrow alley. He approached. Through the warped glass, he saw her. Neera, laughing beside a boy with pale skin and tired eyes. She tucked a blanket over his legs and handed him a book. Her world was small, yes, but filled with tenderness. He didn't knock. Didn't interrupt. Instead, he turned and walked away, the echo of her voice in his head. The days after that brief encounter fell into place like autumn leaves, gentle but undeniable in their descent. Neera barely thought of the man in the navy coat. She had work, responsibilities, and a sick brother whose health felt like a candle flickering in the wind. Her life was measured not in dramatic moments, but in quiet resilience, like warming Micah's socks before bed, walking through rain because the bus fare had gone to his medication, or memorizing textbook passages while restocking cafe napkins. And yet, somewhere across the city, Calder Rowan was unraveling. He had returned to the cafe again. Not once, but 3 times. The first time, he passed by without stopping, eyes scanning for the girl in the brown apron who'd returned something simple and stolen something significant. The second time, he sat across the street, sipping bitter espresso, watching her through the cafe's rain-smudged glass. She didn't notice him. The third time, she did. It was a late afternoon, just before sunset. The cafe was nearly empty, a lull between the after-school rush and evening couples. Neera was wiping down tables when the bell above the door rang, and there he was, as if conjured by memory, navy coat, those same gray eyes. This time, he looked uncertain. "You again," she said, tilting her head, trying not to smile. "I was nearby," he replied, then hesitated. "I wanted to thank you. Properly." "You already did. With words. That's enough for me." She motioned for him to sit. "Unless you want to buy something this time? That'd be a first." A chuckle broke through his polished exterior. "I'll have whatever you recommend." She disappeared behind the counter, and Calder found himself relaxing for the first time in days. The noise of his life, the board meetings, shareholder calls, market updates, had gone quiet the moment she'd spoken. When she returned, it was with a hand-poured cup of something cinnamon-scented. "Pumpkin chai," she said. "It's my favorite." He took a sip. It was warm, subtly sweet, unfamiliar. Like her. They talked, not long, but just enough. She asked nothing about his job, his company, or his bank account. Instead, she asked things that felt dangerously close to personal. "Do you like silence? What were you like as a kid? Do you ever feel lonely when everything's still?" He answered. Honestly. Surprised by his own openness. Before she could press further, though, the door swung open with a gust of cold air. A boy entered, thin, coughing into his sleeve. "Micah," she said quickly, rushing over. "Sorry," he rasped. "I wanted to walk." Calder stood, instinctively alert. The boy's cheeks were flushed with exhaustion, his eyes rimmed with gray fatigue. "This is my brother," Neera said as she helped him into a chair. "Micah, this is Calder." "Hey," Micah said, managing a smile. "You the wallet guy?" Calder chuckled. "Guilty." Micah turned to his sister. "You told him about me?" She rolled her eyes. "Only that you're a bottomless pit for soup and that you cheat at Scrabble." Their laughter filled the cafe, not loud, not forced, just soft and real. Calder sat back, watching them. Two people bound by something deeper than hardship, loyalty, love, survival. By the time he left that evening, he had memorized the curve of Neera's smile and the defiant lift of her chin when she spoke about dreams. The following week was quiet again. Calder didn't return, though Neera found herself glancing at the door more often than she'd admit. Something about him lingered, not just the man, but the feeling of being seen. But life, as always, marched on. Micah's condition worsened. His medication was no longer holding back the breathless nights. A low-grade fever had been stalking him for days, and Neera, already stretched, couldn't afford another doctor's visit. Still, she worked her shifts, folded laundry in the dark, and told herself they would make it. Somehow. Like they always had. Then, one evening, while closing up, the bell rang again. She didn't even look up. "We're closed," she called tiredly. "I know," said a voice she recognized. She turned, and there he was. Calder. No navy coat this time. Just a simple sweater, a warm scarf, and something nervous in his posture. "I just wanted to drop this off." He held out a small paper bag, brown, folded neatly. Neera hesitated, then took it. Inside, groceries. Soup, tea, vitamins. And a handwritten card. "I didn't know what else to do," he said softly. "You looked tired." He looked worse. "And I didn't want to overstep." She stared at the bag. Then at him. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "No strings. No expectations. Just kindness." Her throat tightened. Kindness. It had been so long since someone gave her something without wanting something back. She wanted to cry. Instead, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll go," he said. "Wait," she blurted. He turned. "Do you want to stay for a cup of chai?" His eyes lit with surprise. "And something else, something warmer." "I'd love to." That night, they sat in the empty cafe, 2 cups between them, and a city falling asleep around their tiny shared corner. Neera didn't know who he truly was yet. Calder didn't yet understand how deep her strength ran. But somewhere between steam rising from mugs and soft laughter over shared stories, the walls between them began to melt, not in fire, but in warmth. Something real was blooming, quietly, in the echoes of an ordinary kindness. It didn't happen all at once. Their connection grew slowly, the kind of slow that sneaks up on you and changes everything before you even realize it. A few more late-night visits to the cafe. A shared walk home when the buses stopped running. A conversation about their favorite books that turned into hours of laughter under a street lamp buzzing with moths. To the world, they were strangers. But to each other, something unspoken was forming, something delicate and undeniable. Calder never told Neera what he did for a living. She never asked. And maybe that's what drew him closer to her than anyone else had in years. She didn't treat him like a headline, a fortune, or a position. She treated him like a person. But in a world obsessed with titles, secrets never stay secrets for long. On a cold Thursday morning, the first crack appeared. Neera was running late. Micah had a rough night and she'd been up with him until dawn. She sprinted through the cafe's back entrance, still tying her apron, only to find her manager frozen in front of his phone. He looked up with wide eyes. "Did you do something?" he asked slowly. Neera frowned. "Like what?" He turned the screen toward her. It was a photo. Grainy, zoomed in, but unmistakable. She was sitting across from Calder on the cafe patio, her head tilted, smiling. His hand rested gently on hers. The caption read, "Mystery woman seen with tech tycoon Calder Rowan, who is she?" The blood drained from her face. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not." Before she could finish, her phone buzzed. Then again. And again. Texts. Missed calls. Social media notifications piling up like a wave crashing into her world. The story had already gone viral. Not just on gossip blogs, but business news, tabloids, even entertainment sites. Every outlet was trying to figure out who she was. What she wanted. Why she was with him. At first, the questions were passive. Just a waitress? Or something more? From behind the counter? Into the boardroom? But quickly, they turned cruel. Gold digger. Strategic flirt. Homeless brother equals sympathy scam? Neera barely made it through her shift. The customers stared too long, whispered too loudly. One even snapped a photo without asking. Her co-workers, once friendly, now kept their distance. By closing time, her manager took her aside. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting her eyes. "The attention's hurting business." She nodded before he even finished. "I understand." She walked home in silence. Across town, Calder stood in a boardroom that suddenly felt colder than any winter street. The directors sat stiffly around the long table, eyes sharp and voices sharper. "You're jeopardizing our brand. This woman, you don't even know her. You've built something real, Calder. Don't throw it away for a distraction." He stared at them, jaw tight. They spoke of reputation, strategy, optics, as if the human being behind the headlines didn't matter. He stood slowly. "I'm not in the business of abandoning people who showed up for me," he said evenly. "You can call it reckless. I call it right." He left the room before they could argue. But the damage had already begun. Neera turned off her phone for 2 full days. She shut the blinds. Ignored the knocks. Cancelled her next shift at the cafe. Even Micah noticed her silence, asking gently if she was okay. "I'm fine," she lied. But inside, she wasn't. She felt exposed. Like her whole life had been torn open and poured out for strangers to dissect. That evening, she went to the park, her quiet place. There was a bench near a willow tree that no one visited after sundown. She sat there, coat pulled tight, and let the cold soak through until it matched the emptiness inside. Then footsteps. She looked up. Calder. His face was flushed from the wind. His coat undone. He looked like he'd been searching for hours. "Don't," she said, standing. "Please. I can't." "They're wrong," he said softly, stepping forward. "You did nothing wrong." "You didn't tell me who you were," she snapped, not out of anger, but heartbreak. "I didn't even get a warning before they came for me." "I know. I should have told you. But you're the first person who's seen me, not the money." She laughed bitterly. "And now the world sees me as someone who used you." Calder moved closer. "You helped me without knowing my name. You didn't ask for anything. You were just kind. And I'm not going to let that kindness be punished." Her voice cracked. "You should let me go. They'll ruin everything you built." "Then let them," he said, fierce now. "If keeping you means walking away from a company, a title, 1,000 suits who care more about image than people, then I'll walk." Her eyes widened. "You can't mean that." "I do." He reached out, gently taking her hand. "Let me choose you, Neera. The same way you chose to help a stranger without expecting a thing in return." For the first time in days, she stopped trembling. Because somewhere beneath the headlines, beneath the fear, and the grief, and the noise, was this moment. Real. Steady. Unshakable. She nodded, barely. "Okay," she whispered. "But I'm scared." He smiled gently. "Then we'll be scared together." The next day, Calder Rowan resigned as CEO of his company. The news stunned the business world. Investors panicked. Analysts speculated. But Neera? She stood beside him on the rooftop of a low-income community center he'd funded years ago, the place where they planned to launch something new together. Something that didn't require spotlights or suits or clickbait headlines. They called it the Return Project, a safe space for youth education, skill building, and second chances. Inspired by a single moment when someone gave something back without asking for anything in return. And from that moment forward, the world would no longer define Neera by rumor. She would define herself. With her work. Her voice. Her story. And the quiet kind of love that had bloomed in the shadow of a lost wallet. The announcement came like a whisper, but the world heard it like thunder. Calder Rowan resigns as CEO of Rowan Tech. No press conference. No long-winded letter. Just a quiet memo circulated through the company and a brief statement on the website. The media filled in the gaps, as they always did. Stepping down for love? Has Calder Rowan lost control? From billionaire to barista? Meet the woman who cost him everything. And then came the backlash. Commentators dissected his decision. Investors pulled out. Online forums turned ruthless. People who had once praised him now called him reckless, distracted, irresponsible. And through it all, Neera's name was dragged like an unwanted footnote in a story she never asked to be part of. She's manipulating him. A cafe girl takes down an empire. This is what happens when men think with their hearts instead of their heads. Neera read the headlines in silence. She didn't respond. Didn't post. Didn't explain. She simply continued working, day by day, at the community center she and Calder had begun shaping from the bones of a long-abandoned library. The building itself was a symbol. The kind of place everyone used to walk past without seeing. Now, with fresh paint and open doors, it was becoming a home for those who had been forgotten by systems, but not by each other. Inside its walls, kids from neighborhoods like hers were learning how to code. Young parents were writing resumes. Formerly incarcerated teens were planting herbs in rooftop gardens and rebuilding furniture from salvaged wood. Calder, ever the architect, worked behind the scenes designing systems and structure. Neera, ever the heartbeat, brought warmth and vision. They named it the Return Project. Because sometimes the most valuable thing you can give back is belief. But the outside world wasn't done with them yet. It was a Tuesday when the second wave hit. An investigative journalist had gone digging. She uncovered Neera's past, old eviction notices, Micah's medical history, photos of them sleeping in shelters. The article was brutal. The rise of Neera Vale, from homelessness to the CEO's heart. Tragic or tactical? The darker narrative behind the darling couple. It wasn't just a smear. It was a violation. Photos of Neera at her lowest. Medical records twisted into weaponry. Micah's name dragged through digital dirt. When she saw the article, Neera didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply walked outside to the back alley of the community center, leaned against the cool brick wall, and let the silence hold her. She stood there for nearly an hour. Calder found her there. He didn't say anything at first. Just walked over and handed her a cup of warm ginger tea, her favorite. "They found Micah's hospital records," she said quietly. "I know. They showed a picture of me sleeping in a stairwell. I saw it." She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "Why is being vulnerable a crime? Why does surviving make people assume you're scheming?" He stepped closer. "Because it's easier to believe someone played the system than to admit the system failed them." Neera looked away. "I don't want to be famous, Calder. I just wanted to make it to next week." He gently took her hand. "Then let's stop letting them tell our story for us." The next morning, Neera did something she had never done before. She walked into a room full of reporters. A press conference, hastily arranged, with folding chairs and bad lighting. No PR team. No media coach. Just her, a simple microphone, and Calder sitting quietly in the front row beside Micah, who was playing with a toy airplane. She stood in front of the crowd, nervous, but steady. "I didn't grow up knowing people like you would ever ask for my opinion," she began. "So if I stumble, forgive me. I'm more used to serving coffee than fielding questions." A few chuckles. A few awkward glances. "I didn't plan for my life to become a headline," she continued. "But if it's going to be, then let me at least tell you the truth." She spoke of her mother's passing. Of raising Micah alone. Of juggling 3 jobs and still not making rent. She told them about the wallet, how she picked it up because it was the right thing to do, not because of who it belonged to. And then, her voice softening, she said, "What Calder gave me wasn't fame. Or money. He gave me something I'd never been offered before, the space to just be. To exist without explaining myself. To hope." She paused. "And that's what we're building here, for kids who were told they didn't matter. For families no one invested in. For people like me." She took a breath. "So if you're here to write a story, let it be this: we don't rise because someone chooses us. We rise because someone reminds us we can choose ourselves." When she stepped down from the stage, the room was silent. Then came the applause. Not thunderous, not forced, but steady. Real. Later that night, the footage circulated online. Not as clickbait, but as a moment of clarity in a world starving for honesty. And the narrative began to shift. #NiraSpeaks trended on Twitter. Educators shared her speech in classrooms. Social workers passed it among clients. Mothers, fathers, and caregivers commented. Finally, someone who gets it. She didn't just survive. She built. This is the kind of leadership we need. Suddenly, Nira wasn't the girl who cost a CEO his empire. She was the woman building something better. That weekend, Calder took her and Micah to a small patch of land by the ocean. The wind tangled in her hair as she stared at the horizon. He stood behind her, arms wrapped around her waist. "Do you still regret it?" he asked. She turned. "Which part?" "Picking up my wallet." She laughed, a real, full laugh that blew the grief off her shoulders like sea foam. "Not even for a second." He smiled. "Good. Because I'm never losing it, or you, again." They kissed as Micah ran down the shoreline ahead of them, chasing waves. And somewhere in the distance, a future full of light was beginning to bloom. It began not with a ceremony, but with a seed. No spotlight. No red carpet. Just a gathering of people, young and old, in a repurposed community hall that once held forgotten records and broken chairs. Today, it was something new, the return house, a place where second chances weren't a theory but a structure, brick by brick, built from love, loss, and courage. And it was finally opening its doors. The halls echoed with laughter, voices layered in hope. A mural covered the far wall, painted by teens from the neighborhood, depicting a winding road that split into many paths, each blooming into gardens, classrooms, and light. In the center of it all stood Nira Vale, her curls pinned loosely, a sleeveless linen dress soft against her skin, Micah's hand tightly clutched in hers. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Beside her stood Calder Rowan, no longer the CEO in custom suits and scripted boardroom language, but a man who smiled with both his face and eyes. Who held Micah's backpack like it was sacred. Who woke up each morning wondering what else they could grow, together. A journalist approached gently. She didn't ask for gossip or a headline, just one honest question. "What do you hope this place becomes?" Nira looked around. "I hope it becomes proof." Proof? That healing isn't abstract. That people who fall don't have to vanish. That love can rebuild, not just a heart, but an entire system. She smiled softly. Proof that return is possible. Later that evening, after speeches were made, hands were shaken, and tears quietly dried beneath applause, Calder took Nira's hand and led her up the creaky staircase of their apartment above the center. Micah was already asleep, his arms wrapped around a stuffed rocket, the kind Calder had surprised him with after a library visit. On the bookshelf beside his bed sat his first science kit, a stack of comic books, and a photo of the 3 of them laughing in a garden of wild daisies. Nira stood in the doorway, watching. "You built this," Calder said quietly, resting his chin on her shoulder. She shook her head. "We built this." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, hand-wrapped box. "Nothing fancy. Just twine and paper." "What's this?" she asked. He placed it in her hand. A different kind of return. Inside was a small gold pendant in the shape of a compass. Engraved on the back, in simple lettering. "You gave me direction." She laughed through her tears. "You're such a romantic in disguise." He shrugged, grinning. "You returned my wallet. I'm just trying to catch up." That night, they danced barefoot in their tiny living room, music playing softly from an old speaker, the city humming outside the window. Their feet moved slowly across the hardwood, familiar now, comfortable, and Nira leaned her head on Calder's chest, where his heartbeat told her everything she needed to know. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. They were already writing the next chapter. A few months later, Nira published a second book. The Full Return, Why We Stay. Unlike her first, it wasn't a memoir. It was a manifesto. A handbook for anyone building something from rubble, emotionally, financially, spiritually. She wrote it for the single parents, the caregivers, the late-night cleaners with aching backs and full hearts. For the teens who thought one mistake was the end. For the dreamers buried under bills and silence. It became a resource in shelters. A toolkit in classrooms. A spark in cities far beyond hers. Nira didn't become a celebrity. She became something more powerful, a name people trusted. People began writing to her. Letters scrawled in blue ink. Emails from mothers in motels. Teenagers in halfway houses. Retired teachers starting community gardens. They didn't ask for handouts. They asked, "How did you start?" She always replied, "With one kind act." 3 years after that rainy morning when she returned a stranger's wallet, the Return Project had expanded into 7 cities. Each site run by someone who had once come through the original doors as a student, volunteer, or a visitor. Elena, a single mom from St. Louis, started a culinary training kitchen in her city. Rami, once incarcerated, ran a business accelerator for kids in the Bronx. Jules, a teen who once scribbled poems on bathroom walls, was now a published author mentoring others. And at every grand opening, in every city, a worn wallet sat in a glass box, not for display, but for remembrance. The symbolic origin of it all. One act. One return. One forever shifted life. On a quiet spring morning, Nira walked through the original community hall, now bustling with energy. A little girl ran past her, laughing. A teenager hunched over a robotics kit waved as she passed. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and clove. Somewhere upstairs, Calder was coaching a youth startup team on budgeting. Nira stepped into the garden. It had grown wildly, herbs spilling over boxes, wildflowers crawling up trellises, sun catching the colors and bursts of magic. She reached down to water a tomato vine when a familiar voice called behind her. "Found you," Calder grinned, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You disappear like mist in the morning." She took the mug. Garden doesn't water itself. He reached into his pocket, his other pocket, and held something out. The wallet. Still scratched, still faded, still intact. "I think it's time," he said. "For what?" "For this to belong here. Where it started." He placed it in the soil beneath the oldest lavender bush, covering it with a small, smooth stone carved with the word "Begin." She wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Do you ever think about the version of me that just kept walking that morning?" she asked. He turned to her, kissing her temple. "Every day. And I thank the stars she didn't." They stood in silence, listening to the wind through the garden. And then, from the hallway inside, Micah's voice called out. "Mom. I need help with my science board." Nira grinned. "Coming." Calder followed behind her, their hands brushing, not clutching, not clinging, but steady, woven. Because some love stories don't begin with fireworks. Some begin with decency. With doing the right thing. With one hand extended, and one heart returned. And so it ends, or rather, begins again, not with a final page, but with an open door. A garden always growing. A family always building. And the quiet reminder. Sometimes the smallest return is the one that saves everything.